Hey everyone, in this module we're going to cover the e-collar basics, the 101, all the basic essential information that you should know, you should understand before you ever use an e-collar on your dog. So the e-collar is a very powerful tool and you must learn how to use it properly. If done wrong, you can really mess up your dog. But when done right, it is the single greatest quality of life improvement you could ever give your dog, and it unlocks a whole new world of possibilities. And this training program will walk you through the entire process of how to use the e-collar effectively and properly throughout the training. And don't worry, if you follow this training program, it's literally impossible for you to mess up your dog. That's because this training program is designed with the beginner handler in mind, and we account for all of the common mistakes that beginners usually make throughout that process. We account for it. We assume you'll make mistakes in the process, and we account for that in the training plan. So, and the reason why I'm saying this is because a lot of people who join the program, they're hesitant, right? They want to give the dog the freedom, but they're afraid they're going to mess it up. They're afraid of the tool. They're a little intimidated. They just really don't want to mess it up. Maybe they've heard something online or they had a bad experience in the past. And I just want to emphasize to you that if you follow the training program, you will not mess up your dog. Don't worry. We're going to show you how to introduce it properly. Now, how do we use the e-collar? The simplest way I found to explain this is we use the e-collar the exact same way as a leash. The exact same as a leash. The e-collar is simply a tool that allows us to apply and release pressure at a distance. That's it. That's it. It's the exact same as a leash. In other words, just like a leash, we use it to negatively reinforce behaviors the dog knows, or to punish undesirable behaviors. You see? And you've been doing this over the last couple weeks inside the program, right? You've been learning how to use the leash to negatively reinforce the sit, how to use the leash to negatively reinforce the recall. You've been punishing the leash pulling, punishing the dog's reactivity, and you've been using the leash to do all of that. You see? You've been using pressure. And the e-collar is simply a tool that allows us to apply and release pressure at a distance. In other words, it's like a half-mile long invisible leash. That's it. But it's used the exact same way. And the reason why we didn't start introducing the e-collar right on week 1, for example, is because I wanted you to practice using the leash. I wanted you to feel how it was to negatively reinforce a sit. I wanted you to feel what it was like to positively punish a behavior like leash pulling or your dog's reactivity. I wanted you to feel that and experience it, because once we transition to the e-collar, this pressure is no longer physical. Now it's just a little dial that you twist and a screen and a number on a screen. And it's very abstract. And I wanted you to practice applying and releasing pressure on the leash in a physical way where you're connected to the dog so you can feel what you're doing before you made that transition. You see? Everything is done in this course to improve your skills while training your dog at the same time. So that's why the course is structured this way. Now, the main difference between an e-collar and the leash is that the e-collar stim is pressure with no direction. So think about it. If your dog is on a leash and let's say a prong, if you make pressure in one direction, right, you pull towards you, for example, the dog understands, oh, okay, well, clearly the owner, the handler is making pressure on this leash, right? Okay, if I give into the pressure this direction, okay, then the pressure turns off, right? It's pressure with direction. The dog knows that you're the one making the pressure, right? You're the one, they understand how to turn off the pressure by giving into the direction, right? It's attached to something. But the e-collar is pressure with no direction. No direction. It's just pressure. And if you don't say anything, the pressure isn't even attached to you. It's just pressure in like its most abstract form. Just pressure. You see? And this is where e-collar training can get tricky. In order to use the e-collar in our training, we must teach the dog how to respond to the e-collar pressure productively. And we use our leash as the translator. Okay? So this is where people get in trouble, because there's a big misconception out there that like, oh, if I just get an e-collar and I put it on my dog and I just start clicking buttons, my dog will listen. You know, if he doesn't sit, I just zap him on the e-collar and boom, he'll listen, right? Right? No. That's incorrect. You have to teach the dog how to respond productively to the e-collar. There is a teaching process involved in this, right? And this is where the idea of, the e-collar is a shortcut. It's for lazy people. We don't use e-collars because we don't looking for a quick solution. That's all bullshit, right? You don't just introduce the e-collar and just your dog is trained. It doesn't work like that. There's a whole training process you now have to go through, right? In the later weeks of this course, we're going to walk you through that process, but there's a whole training process involved in getting your dog to respond productively to the e-collar. All right? It's not a tool that does the training for you. Remember, tools don't do the training. Training does the training. Okay? Training trains the dog, not tools. So there are 3 phases to e-collar training: the conditioning phase, the intermittent phase, and the proofing phase. And we're going to go through each of these phases. That way you understand where we're going to go with the e-collar and how we're going to use it. But I just want you to take a look over here real quick. And you can see that like in week 3, we're going to be conditioning the recalls, conditioning the play sitting down, the conditioning phase. In week 4, we bump things up to the intermittent phase. You see? And then in week 5 and week 6, we are in the proofing phase. All right? So I just want to lay that out there, but let's go through each phase in detail. So the conditioning phase, what is it? Well, in this phase, our goal is to teach the dog what the e-collar is and how to respond to it productively. So we begin by finding the lowest stimulation level that the dog perceives. This is called the dog's working level. Notice how I said the lowest level the dog perceives. The lowest they perceive. They just perceive it. They just notice it. It's not uncomfortable. It's not like, oh my God, turn this off right now. They just barely perceive it. I think I feel something. I think I feel something. I'm not sure though. That's the working level. Okay? Once we've found the dog's working level, we pair the e-collar with behaviors the dog already knows, using it as a negative reinforcer. And we use the leash and commands the dog already knows to help them work through the confusion. And don't worry if this sounds confusing right now. We're going to walk you through the whole process in detail once we get to the modules. But for now, I just want to give you a high-level overview of what we're doing here. So we layer in the stim at the working level. So we stim at the working level, and then we give the command, or we use the leash, and then we release and reward once the dog hits the position. So we stim at that working level. The dog's like, what is that? I think I feel something. And then we give the command, Fido, come. And then Fido comes, and then we release the pressure. You see? And Fido starts to learn, that little strange thing that I feel, it turns off once I hit the command. You see? We're just layering it in now. We're layering it in before everything, doing something the dog understands, and then we release the pressure. The dog is starting to learn, I see, I understand now. When I feel the stim, I come to you or I sit or whatever, and then the pressure goes away. You see? And we're using very, very, very low levels here to teach the dog this. And first, we condition the recall. That's the first behavior that we condition because we want this to be the default response. And then next, we condition the place command. And last, we condition all the other behaviors like the sits, the downs, the heel entries, and so on. So how long does it take? The conditioning phase only takes 7 days. And it shouldn't take any longer. Otherwise, the dog starts to become desensitized to the stim. So all of week 3, essentially, this week that you're about to begin, the recall, conditioning, the place, sit, down, this only takes a week to complete. And here's why we do it this way. The first reason we do it this way is for the dog. It's important that the dog understands what the pressure is and how to respond to it productively. Because remember, e-collar pressure is novel because it's pressure with no direction. So we help the dog work through the confusion and we teach them how to win. This is also a very important step if you have an extremely sensitive dog or you've had a dog who has a bad experience with e-collar training in the past. Right? So if you have a very nervous, very sensitive dog, this stage is essential. And if you have a dog who's had already bad e-collar training in the past, right? This is why we do it. The first reason is for the dog. The second reason is for the human. You're probably going to mess up a lot in this phase, and that's okay. Your timing's going to be off. You're going to have difficulties finding the working level. You won't be getting consistent contact. You're going to realize, oh shit, my collar was dead the whole time, right? Like, you're going to mess up during this phase, and that's okay. All right, that's okay. It's a part of the process because you're learning too. You're learning all this. You're doing this for the first time. And we do it this way because even though you'll mess up along the way, it's impossible to mess up your dog throughout this process. All right, so that's why we do it. Those are the two reasons why. The first reason is for the dog. The second reason is for the human. So once you've done the conditioning on week 3, which is this week, that's what you're going to be doing this week. The next thing, when you move on to week 4, is the intermittent phase. So the intermittent phase, in this phase, our goal is to test the dog's understanding of the e-collar in various contexts and ensure that the dog responds productively to it. All right, we're testing the dog's understanding at this point. Okay, so this is the variable phase where we start testing the understanding of the stim by using the e-collar to negatively reinforce behaviors. So when you're working on the intermittent phase and you're out in public, you're doing a training session in your backyard or at a park or whatever, this is basically the process. So here's what the 3 possible reps will look like. So a perfect rep looks like this. We give the command, and they hit the position right away. Perfect. We just reward and release them as normal, right? No stim, no anything required, right? We tell them to sit and they sit, boom, reward. We tell them to come and they come, awesome. That's exactly what we want. We want a dog who listens to our commands, right? So that's a perfect rep. The next possibility is we have an assisted rep. We give the command and they ignore it. So now we stim at a moderately negatively reinforcing level, so above the working level. Now it's getting uncomfortable. Right? Now we're increasing the stim a bit. And then they hit the position. So we release and reward as usual, right? We tell Fido to come. Fido doesn't come. So we stim. Ooh, it's uncomfortable. I need to come. And he turns to come. Nice, buddy. And we reward him, release all that pressure as usual, right? We tell Fido to down. He doesn't down. We stim at an uncomfortable level. He hits the down. Nice job, buddy. And then we release the pressure, reward him as usual, right? So that's an assisted rep. We use the e-collar to help him find the position in that situation. We use the e-collar stim to negatively reinforce the behavior. So that's an assisted rep. The next possibility is you have a failed rep. You give the command and the dog ignores it. So we stim at a negatively reinforcing level, but the dog gets too stressed or they're unable to find the position on their own. So we repeat the command, use leash pressure to help them in the position. Once the dog hits the position, we release all the pressure and praise. So for example, let's say Fido's out in the park. You tell Fido to come. Fido doesn't come. You stim. He says, ooh, that's uncomfortable. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to turn it off. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? You see? He's confused. He doesn't know what to do in this situation. That's why it's important to have the leash on, to use it as your translator. Now you come in, repeat the command, Fido come, use the leash to make directional pressure towards you. Once he comes to you, all the pressure goes away. The stim goes away, the leash pressure goes away, all the pressure goes away. You're praising him to you, you reward him when he gets to you. You see, in that situation, you had to come in and help him out with the leash. Because he understands the leash pressure, right? Let's say, for example, you tell Fido to down and he doesn't down. You stim, he says, ooh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. He starts scratching at the e-collar. You come in, repeat the command, down. You come in, grab the leash, pressure down, and then the pressure releases. You see? You're using the leash to come in and help him through that. See, he doesn't know what the stim is. He doesn't know how to respond to it. So you come in using the leash to help him out. You see? So that's a failed rep when that happens. After a failed rep, we always go back to the conditioning phase for that behavior on the next 2 reps. So for example, if Fido fails to hit the recalls, for example, he freaks out, you have to use the leash. Okay, now we just go back to the conditioning, right? We're going to go back down to the working level, dial the e-collar down, just stim, give the command, release the pressure, and we're going to do that for a couple reps. And don't worry, we're going to show you how to do all of this stuff once we get to that point in the training. I just want to give you a high-level overview right now. So that's the intermittent phase. The reason we do it this way is to ensure the dog understands how to turn off the pressure. When you increase the levels, it's common to see some stress and confusion at first. And this is why we hop in with the leash, use it as our translator to get them back in position and work through that stress. This is the most essential phase of the training before you can ever take off that leash. The most essential phase, the intermittent phase. Okay? If there's any point in the training where you spend the longest, it's probably going to be in the intermittent phase in week 4. All right? Like, you can imagine how bad this would be. Like, this is where people run into trouble. Like, they think the e-collar is just this tool they put on and they just click a button and the dog listens. The dog's off a leash away from them. They tell Fido to come. He doesn't come, so they stim. And then Fido literally doesn't come because he doesn't know that's what he's supposed to do when he feels that pressure. You see? And that's where you run into trouble. You got to work through this. You've got to teach him how to respond. So that's the intermittent phase. You're going to go through the intermittent phase after you complete the conditioning phase, and that's going to be in week 4 of the training. Now in week 5 of the training is when we move on to the proofing phase. So the proofing phase is where we ensure our dog is 100% reliable even around those heavy, extreme distractions. In this phase, we escalate to medium-high levels on the e-collar to strongly negatively reinforce behaviors. So at this stage, we give the command, we stim on a medium to high level, and then we release and reward once they hit the position. So in this stage, we're using high levels of negative reinforcement to create reliability in all of the basic behaviors that the dog understands. At this point, the dog understands the commands. They understand the e-collar pressure. Now we're just really holding them accountable to the behaviors that they already know, right? Fido doesn't come. Okay, now we're up in the pressure though. When we stim, ooh, okay, I gotta turn and come. You see? Now we're making it a real consequence for ignoring commands that the dog already knows and already understands. The reason we have to do this is because this is the only way to ensure the dog is 100% reliable. 100% reliable in a variety of environments and contexts. This is the most critical phase from a safety perspective. So in the proofing phase, this is where you're going out to high distraction environments. You're training in high distraction environments. You're seeking out really distracting things. You're calling your dog off of wildlife and you're healing past dogs and you're in crowded areas. Like, this is where you proof all of the training. You proof it. This is where you finish the dog, right? And you do all of this stuff on a leash, by the way, right? You don't take off the leash until the very, very last week. You notice that? Almost all of e-collar training happens on a leash. That's another thing that most people don't realize. So that's the proofing phase. And you stay on this proofing phase essentially indefinitely, right? Your dog will always be on the proofing phase. Now, what about after the training, right? So that's going through the proofing phase, all that. And then, of course, you take off the leash in week 6, and we'll guide you through that whole process. But what about after the training? What about after your dog is off-leash trained, after you've completed the program? Well, after the training, you get to live life off-leash with your dog, and you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You get to go on off-leash walks and off-leash hikes and off-leash fetch in the park, off-leash everything, right? Your dog will be 100% reliable. However, that being said, all training must be maintained, and you must continue to reinforce behaviors, otherwise they will go extinct. So in behavioral psychology, there's this term called extinction. And extinction basically says that in the absence of reinforcement, behaviors will extinguish. They disappear. And so you must continue to reinforce behaviors if you want them to stick, right? You must reinforce behaviors positively or negatively if you want them to be maintained. And training is all the same, right? When you're going through the training program, you're essentially using reinforcement to manipulate and shape and manufacture these behaviors. So if you want them to stick, you've got to reinforce them continually for the lifetime of the dog. Now, once the dog is fully trained and you've completed the program, the e-collar serves as your insurance policy to keep your dog safe, right? It's your insurance policy now. Like when you're out in public, walking around your neighborhood, you probably won't need it, but it's there just in case. It's your insurance policy. It's your backup. It's your safety mechanism. And I recommend having an e-collar on your dog every time you step outside for at least 1 full year after you've completed this program. Every time the dog's outside, the e-collar's on. Every time. Every time. And of course, it goes without saying, your dog should always be wearing an e-collar in high distraction environments, just in case. Like, you never know what might happen in those situations, right? So just in case, even if you don't need it, it's better to have it on, right? As the saying goes, it's better to have something and not need it than to need something and not have it. So it's always better to have the e-collar on just in case. Just in case. You never know. You never know, right? And you always want to be ready for something just in case it happens, right? That's why it's your insurance policy. It's your backup. Now, preventing e-collar wise dogs. This is a common question that people have when they jump into the program, right? Will my dog become e-collar wise? Will they only listen to me when the collar's on versus when it's off? Maybe they heard some story of a friend or something. The dog only listened when the e-collar was on, but completely didn't listen when the e-collar was off, right? So an e-collar wise dog is a dog whose behavior changes when the collar is on versus when it's off. So to prevent your dog from becoming e-collar wise, I recommend adhering to the cardinal rule. The cardinal rule states that every time your dog steps foot outside, the e-collar is on. Period. Always, no matter what. Every time your dog steps outside, the e-collar is on. Every time. Okay? I don't care if the dog is, people break this rule all the time because they get lazy, right? Oh, we're just going on a walk around the neighborhood, just a quick potty walk. Oh, we're at the park and I forgot the e-collar at home. It'll be fine, right? You see, people get lazy and they make all of these fucking excuses. And then they're like, it'll be fine, whatever, it'll be fine. And then guess what? Something happens. Oh, we thought it was going to be fine. Oh, there was a dog that popped out of nowhere and Fido ran over to the dog and I called him and he ignored me and I didn't have a way to negatively reinforce it. And guess what? Fido just learned in that moment. Okay. Mommy or daddy couldn't reinforce the recall in this situation. Okay. You see? Dogs aren't stupid, guys. Do not make this mistake. So many people make this mistake just because they're lazy, honestly. So adhere to this cardinal rule. Every time your dog steps foot outside, backyard, front yard, walk, park, low distraction, high distraction, I don't care. The e-collar is on. Even if you don't use it, that's fine. You just have the pocket in your whole time during the walk. You didn't even use it once. That's fine. Continue using it next time and the next time and the next time. Always have the e-collar on just in case, okay? And not only will this keep your dog safe and allow you to continue proofing behaviors as you need, but your dog will also never learn the difference between collar on and collar off. They never learn the difference. You see? Every time they come outside, the e-collar is on. Every time. Every time they're in the backyard, every time they step out the front door, every single time, the collar is always on. You see? The dog never learns the difference between collar on and collar off. It just is. They just always listen to you. You see? And that becomes the default. Understand? People mess this up because they give their dog opportunities to learn to become collar wise, right? They do really just stupid stuff, guys. Just avoid it altogether. It's way easier if you do this. If you just prevent your dog from becoming e-collar wise off the hop. All right? If you adhere to this cardinal rule, your dog will never become e-collar wise. All right. So the last thing I want to give you guys is just some helpful e-collar tips and reminders. And I'll probably update this list as we go, so you can just refer to it and read through this again as necessary. But here are some helpful tips and reminders. The first thing is getting consistent contact is the biggest pain in the ass with e-collars. Biggest pain in the ass. So I'm going to link a guide to help you out and help you get consistent contact. And I'll show you what I do to get consistent contact. Because it goes without saying, man, if you don't have contact, you're fucked. If you think you have contact and you don't, man, that can be a huge safety problem, right? Especially if the dog is completely off leash, right? You need to have consistent contact. And so I'm going to link a guide to help you get consistent contact. The next thing is the e-collar should be positioned at the bottom The e-collar should, so when you're wearing the e-collar in conjunction with other tools, the e-collar should be at the bottom and the prong or slip lead above it. All right? So like in terms of positioning on your dog's neck, e-collar's down here, prong and slip lead is above. If you're using a flat collar, the flat collar can be below or it can be above, but usually I'll put it below and I'll put the e-collar on top. All right? The next thing, move the e-collar around on the dog's neck to avoid getting contact sores. So contact points are like these little, they're like just two things just sitting on the dog's neck, like they're rubbing around on there and like they're pointy and they're metal and they're just rubbing right directly against your dog's skin. And any 2 points that are just sitting on your dog's skin, like eventually after an extended period of time, your dog will develop some sores or some blisters basically, right? And so you want to make sure you're moving them around just to like slightly different areas on the neck. You can even rotate it to the complete other side and just move it around. Like each session, just kind of put it in a different spot, and that will prevent your dog from getting contact sores. If you ever notice your dog does have a contact sore, like you kind of rub around their neck and you notice like a little scab, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Like they're going to be fine, but just take a note of that. Okay. Like, let's see. Okay, maybe I had to set the e-collar on a long time for this. I was doing this on this side of the neck like day after day after day. Okay, let's make sure I rotate it around more frequently to prevent that from happening again in the future, right? The next thing, the e-collar should be on the left side or the right side of the dog's neck. It should not be on the throat, and it should definitely not be on the back of the head, right? It should be on the sides of the neck, okay? Keep sessions short, fun, and positive. Remember that pressure creates stress. And so make sure you do as we're showing you to do in the training program, but make sure you're using positive reinforcement throughout the training process to balance out the dog's emotions, right? When you're just making pressure on the dog, especially like e-collar pressure, it's a very novel, it's a very strange, it's a very weird type of pressure. And some dogs, especially if you have a very, very sensitive dog, you have to be careful with how much pressure you're applying, right? You need to make sure you balance it out with positive reinforcement to balance out the dog's emotions throughout the training session, right? Another thing too is some dogs don't like having this big, heavy ass block just clamped to their neck, right? It's very uncomfortable. And some dogs will appear very shut down, right? And I remember I've had a client, he was this super active, super hyped up, pit bull mix, and he was just super hyped like all the time, right? Super excited, always ready to go, lots of energy, lots of drive, and he was just always ready to work. And then when we put the e-collar on, he appeared very shut down, right? He appeared kind of down in the dumps. And it was when it was an in-person session, and a few weeks went by, and I called up the owner. I was like, "Hey man, is everything good? Like you haven't booked your next session yet?" And he was like, "Oh man, like he's kind of down in the dumps. I don't know what it is. He doesn't like the e-collar pressure. I don't know if it's the training or what." Like, and then I had him just explain to me and walking me through it, and I was like, "Bro, I think he's fine. Right? I think he just doesn't like this thing around his neck, right? And I think you should just start counter conditioning, right? Every time you bring out the e-collar, give him some food, you take it off, bring out the e-collar, give him some food, bring out the e-collar, feed him, bring out the e-collar, put it on, play with him, right? Just counter condition it and just desensitize him to wearing it. Just have him wear it around the house and stuff and pretend like it's not even a problem, right? Don't even read into it. And sure enough, books a session a week later. Oh man, like I was just overthinking it, right? Like he was totally fine. He just didn't like the thing around his neck. It was just tight. It was uncomfortable. It felt weird. And so he looked a little shut down, right? Orbit, for example, my dog, he gets like this when we put on a harness. Like he puts on a harness and he just freezes. He's like, "I'm uncomfortable. I can't do it." Right? And then he just doesn't want to do anything. And so we got to work him through that, right? "Oh, you can do it. You can walk." Like, yeah, you can walk. Yeah, you can sit. You can down. You can play even, right? And so we start just desensitizing, getting him used to wearing it. Some dogs just don't like having this thing clamped to their neck. So if you have a dog who's like that, counter condition it. Desensitize them to wearing it. Just have them wear it around the house and don't read into it too much, right? Don't overthink it. "Oh, my dog, he looks like he's going to be fine. It's just a thing around his neck. He'll be okay." All right? The last thing, make sure you complete the program in order. Do not skip steps. do not skip steps. Everything is structured this way intentionally, okay? If you're on the conditioning phase, you shouldn't be like, I better not get a question from you. Miles, I'm working in high distraction environments and my dog's not responding to the working level. What are you doing? Don't skip steps, okay? Work through everything in order. Everything is structured this way intentionally. Everything's thought through, so do not skip around. Work through each week in order. Don't skip steps. Don't rush the process. All right. So that's it. A quick summary for you guys. The e-collar is used the exact same way as a leash. The e-collar is simply a way to apply and release pressure at a distance. Most off-leash training happens on a leash, right? So don't be in a rush to take off the leash. That's not until week 6 of the training, literally the last week. Most of e-collar training happens on a leash. The next thing, the conditioning phase, is where we teach the dog how the e-collar works. That is this week, week 3. The intermittent phase is where we test the dog's understanding. That is week 4. And the proofing phase is where we test our training in every possible edge case to ensure our dog is 100% reliable. That's week 5 and 6. Prevent your dog from becoming e-collar wise by adhering to the cardinal rule. And during the e-collar training, the e-collar is a training tool. And after the training, the e-collar serves as our insurance policy. So that's it. That's everything you need to know about the e-collar. Those are all the e-collar basics. And don't worry, we're going to show you the entire training process step by step as we work through it. So I'll see you guys in the next module.